Yeah. Yes, we're live. Hey, everyone. Happy Tuesday night. Last Tuesday in February. Come on in here. Super excited for our conversation that we're going to have tonight. We have the amazing Julie Boyd Cole back with us. Hey, Julie.
Hi there.
Hi. I am so glad that you came back. I'm super excited for our conversation tonight. So, we're going to give everybody a second to pop in. I know that they do not want to miss this good content. So we're going to give them like 30 seconds to pop in. When you pop in, say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. We always love to know where you're tuning in from. So I'm super excited because Julie's back. And we could not fit everything in the last hour that we talked. So I'm excited to dig into some of that today. So many of you like 30. You doing okay tonight, Julie? You ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome.
As I've told you before, I'm always happy to help and answer questions and share my research and share my journey and share my story. But it is so sad that we have to do this.
Yep.
It is
Very.
that it's an unfair and unjust situation, and my heart goes out to all the people that are facing this today. I know how troubling and disrupting and anxiety ridden that everybody is who's going through this. So don't let my smiles fool you. I am, my heart breaks with you, but I'll help in any way I can.
It does. And our hearts do break for it, and that's why we do what we do. That's why we bring this conversation to the forefront. That's why we're fearless. That's why she has written books about it. That's why we do these lives, to put this in the forefront. We want to give you a voice. Hey, from New Zealand. Hey, from England. Hey, from Virginia. Hey, everybody, come on in. We have some really good. We're going to touch on quite a few topics tonight. So if you need to grab a pen, grab one. If you need to share this with someone, make sure they watch it, because Julie has some really good content for us. As a survivor, she has been through this journey, and she wrote this book, and this is the book we're going to touch on today. Right? And it's called Dear Family Court Judge. She wrote a different one too, and that we talked about that last time, but we're going to dive right in, right? And so I had the honor of reading this book. And so I'm going to pick apart a little bit, and we're going to just chat about it. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that, I'm going to just hit it right out. We're going to talk about child custody first, because if you have a child with your abuser, Julie, as you know, having a child grow up in an abusive relationship, sharing them, the thought of sharing them with your abuser and knowing that the abuse will most likely continue in the abuser's next relationship is really difficult.
Yeah, it really is. There's nothing listen, for most people who are victims of domestic abuse and they share children with their abuser, there's different journeys and different paths that happen. But what I know is pretty consistent among the victims of domestic abuse is that they somehow believe that the children can have a relationship with their abusive parent, and 9 times out of 10 it's going to be abusive father. It certainly does. It isn't gender specific, but right now in this era in 2021, in industrialized countries across the world, the men have a lot of power, and so therefore it gives them an opportunity to become abusers. And when they share children with their partners, most likely those partners are women, and they are just really ripe in family court to be looked at and favorably. And so they see that family court is a way to start the abuse all over again. Victims,
and they do that,
right? Yep. And victims tend not to realize that that's happening because this is such an unknown phenomenon, and which is why this type of thing is important, not just to help those that are fighting it, but to raise awareness about what's going on.
And for attorneys and judges, the same, as victim survivors, so we don't know. I remember walking into the courthouse and thinking, this judge, there's no way that the judge is going to give my ex-husband full, half of this custody. Doesn't he see these pictures? Didn't he hear my story? Doesn't he know that my children have witnessed this violent abuse? And of course, we walked out and he got half of custody. Like, it blew my mind. They didn't even want to see pictures. They didn't want to hear stories. They didn't really want to know what happened. And it can be just so terrifying because, Julie, we've lived the abuse and we know that the children have seen it. So you talk a little bit in the book about how abusers are still given custody And I remember telling the judge, I'm like, he's like, and the judge is like, well, what do you want me to do about it? Like, that's their dad. And I thought, I'm shaking, I'm hysterically crying. I'm like, well, could you make him get help? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, we can make him do batterer's intervention. Ask me, I've been out 10 years. He has not stepped foot in batterer's intervention. It was a mandatory. He didn't have to do it. And
my abuser did do 2 years of batterer's intervention, and it didn't help.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Trust me when I say we're not expecting it to necessarily help. They do it because they have to sometimes, and then sometimes they don't do it at all. But see, that this is what I told the judge. I said, he's an abuser. The next relationship that he goes in again, he's going to abuse. And if you're telling me that my children get to have visitation and spend time with him, that means I'm not there, but my children are still seeing abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just see one of the comments. I just want to say that there are some judges that are getting training with Lindy Bancroft, who is an amazing researcher, psychologist, who's written a number of books. I highly recommend his books. But he's been working with batterers for 25 plus years, maybe even 30 years by now. And he really advises them that this is not a mental disorder, an emotional disorder that can be cured. There's no treatment for this. So therefore, it's not like the judge can wave their finger at the abuser and say, "Don't let me hear you did this again." That it's not doable. And so they are, and then the ACE study, which is if you go to stopabusecampaign.com or there's the leadership there are really showing up the ACE study, which and the Saunders review that say that children who are in this dynamic, the dynamic alone is causing enormous damage to children. It's not whether the child has been hit or even emotionally abused directly, although they all are, but it's just the dynamic alone is so unstable for the children that they're living in anxiety and fear, and that causes lifelong damage.
Absolutely. And you do talk about that a little bit more in the chapter in the book. I'm not going to say her name, but someone shared in the comments about how, they thought that they had all this evidence and they would investigate and they didn't. And as a result, they lost their children. And even before we came in, you talked about how you've worked with cases where rapists have won custody of their children. Sex abusers have won custody of their children. And it's enraging. Honestly, it's just simply enraging because abusers are abusers are abusers. You know what I mean? Yeah. And losing custody. Oh, and you talked a little about before we got on too, how, this new phenomenon about how men that are abusers, we're not just talking about just good men. We're not talking about that. We're talking about men who are abusers are going to court to fight for custody for their children. And they're looked at as heroes.
That's right. And, the American Bar Association puts out a list of 10 myths about custody suits. And one of them is that male abusers, and again, it's really important, and most of the people who are listening to this are experiencing this in some way. So this is, they don't doubt that this is going on. But for the general public, 90% of divorce with minor children never see a custody battle. It's all done between the adults, the parents. They sort out who's doing what when, who's in charge of what, and they sort it out among themselves and present it to their family court, and they sign off on it, and it's fine. So 90% of these cases run through family court with, basically getting a rubber stamp. But in 10% of those cases, which is probably 70% of contested custody cases. So contested custody is that 10%, and a huge chunk of them are driven by domestic violence. And so what happens is somebody is tipped off the male abuser that, hey, you can take this to court, or they're going to court because the state is going after them for unpaid child support.
Which they don't want to pay.
Right. So, but even if the woman take, and again, I'm not trying to say there aren't male victims. Let me just make that clear. But I'm going to speak specifically about women victims right now. If the woman says, I'm taking my kids, I won't come after you for child support, and off I go, and he says, fine, go ahead. boom, 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 everything's, the woman takes off with full custody. The state can still go after that abuser for child support if that woman files a single claim for assistance, like food stamps or anything like that.
Right.
And if that happens, the state can then open up its own independent case.
Mm-hmm.
Those are then, some of those men are saying, well, if I'm going to pay, then I want some custody, or I want charge. So what happens?
And the thing is, Julie, they don't even necessarily want custody, because what we're still looking at is control. We're not looking at custody.
That's correct.
It's still about control.
They're not looking at time that they want to spend. What they're talking about is they want control over the family. They learn quickly that society looks favorably on them for seeking custody, that they're seen as father heroes, and that they can easily sway a judge even if there is recorded domestic violence, and they, meaning a criminal charge. And I know of cases where the abuser has stipulated to all the domestic violence, and they're still being seen as a potential custodial parent. So what lawyers are facing, is that, hey, it doesnn't really matter, blah, blah, blah. So they don't want to open up that can of worms. And
not realizing, Julie, it's a victim survivor's whole life.
That's right.
They're talking about, oh, it's going to be really stressful in court. So that leads me to like my next point, which we're going to talk about lawyers, the lawyer's advice. And a lot of times as an advocate, I see it every day. I can't afford an attorney. But they're trying to take me to court. They want custody. They have all the money. And victim survivors oftentimes do not have the money to pay a good attorney. They don't.
That's right.
And so they're stuck with maybe a public defender, or not even being able to defend themselves in court.
Yeah, I talk to victims all the time, and have for years. And it is probably the biggest thread of the injustice is I cannot afford an attorney, or I've already paid an attorney all the retainer I can, and it's used up. What I say every single time is it is very hard to defend yourself in family court. There are cases where people can do it, and it'll depend on your individual judge. But instead, I say call family and friends, start a GoFundMe page, do whatever craziness you can think of, even if it's, taking out credit cards. I mean, literally, I was lucky in my case because I could not afford an attorney, but I found an attorney who was willing to go on a contingency. And that meant that I laid out my case. She said to me, I'm going to go after your abuser for court costs. You will not have to pay a penny until that. So I went through the entire process without paying anything, and I was lucky. But the truth is that you can ask. Don't give up. That's going to be the hardest hurdle to get over, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to go crazy because you're in pain, and you're trying to protect your children. And so
I appreciate your honesty on that thing. It's going to hurt. It's painful. It's a journey, but you fight for yourself. You don't allow yourself to give up. I want to read. So what part of her book, she did research and she got answers from actual victim survivors. And this lady said, I've spent over $30,000 divorcing my abuser because he fought me every inch. I walked away with all of our debt, 2 children to raise by myself, and I still haven't received child support. I can see why women stay. It is not easy to leave. And I consider myself lucky because I have a good job. Yeah. So regardless, they're losing so much money, if they even have the money to get legal representation. And so I'm going to skip forward a little bit because you talked about the process of going through family court, having an attorney, but you made a really good point when you talked about you still need to get some kind of help while you're going through that journey.
Absolutely. You really, really need it. Because family court is re-traumatizing or re-triggering because the abuse starts all over again. And now your abuser is getting a pass to do it. They're being permitted to do it. So you're getting lied to and gaslit and emotionally abused, financially abused. You're not maybe getting physically abused anymore, but all the other abuse is happening, and your children are being used as pawns.
That's
That
it.
is incredibly traumatizing and re-triggering. And so therefore, if any of you have PTSD, it's going to get re-triggered. You're going to be symptomatic. You need to have it is best for your court case to be in treatment, not so that you can say that you are, but so that every time you leave, an incident, you have a place to go
Yes.
and get some immediate healing just for that little moment.
Yes. Support group, therapy, and advocate support, some kind of support to help you through those emotions. Because otherwise, listen, we can sit in family court, but listen, I've been abused. Look at these pictures. Oh my goodness. And they're like, why? And then the abuser's like, see, look at her, look at him. You see how crazy they are? See, I told you they're a little unstable. And so it's so important that you find, and there are advocacy groups, there are free or discounted counseling services. So we're just encouraging that as you go through the court process to find a support system, because it is going to be triggering, traumatizing, and it's not good for you to kind of go through that by yourself. So have a good support system for that.
No, and it's really important to know that this is crazy. This is unfair. This is corrupt. We're in a system that is unfair and corrupt. And it is universal. I know we have some people from overseas on. I can tell you, I talk to people in New Zealand. I talk to people in Australia. I talk to people in England and Canada and Hong Kong. All are experiencing this, and it's the industrialized world for some reason, and frankly, I don't really care the reason anymore. I just want it to stop. But that's why after all of this, you can become advocates and you can work hard to raise awareness. But it is unfair. It is corrupt. You are not alone, and you did not cause it.
Yes, you guys heard that? I love it. Facts on facts on facts, Julie. That's it. I know you're not the only one going through this. It's hell for you, and we know that. And that's why I encourage you to get a support system. Please get a support system, no matter where you are in the world.
And you can find little kernels that will help you or could help you in your journey. That's the other thing that's so challenging about this, is that every judge is different. Every lawyer is different. Every case has its own nuances. A 5-year-old versus a 15-year-old is different. So there are nuances of this hurricane of family court that are happening. You are the one who can see it best. So, sometimes I'll get emails from people that say, help me. And the truth is, unless I'm sitting there right by your side when all this is happening, there's not a lot I can do, because there is not a game plan that's tried and true, except attorney, good therapy. So that's why I say your first order of business is, if you're just beginning this, is to do whatever you can, and then forgive yourself, because there is no path there's no
one size fits all for everybody.
No. And you're doing your best, and you have to forgive yourself, because it's part of getting through it. If you're hard on yourself or second guessing yourself or blaming yourself, it will make it worse for you and your children.
And it's so interesting too, because I see people kind of saying in the comments that they don't have the support system. Or your first line of support, of course, would be the local domestic violence agency. That's always, because they have resources. They are funded to have resources, attorneys, people that can help you get a restraining order. So that's going to be your first source. And sometimes if they can't help you, you kind of move outside of that circle. But there are resources available. Do you have to turn over every stone? Possibly. Is it fair? No. But it's still possible to get the assistance that you
have to fill out forms that you don't want to have to fill out. Are you weak emotionally? And this is very hard to do. Yes. Which is why another real key is to find, like, domestic abusers it's just in our DNA to not tell anybody and to keep it to ourselves. I mean, domestic victims. And so that's another thing you got to break. You got to start telling people,
because they depend on that. They are allowed to continue to abuse because we stay silent.
Well, and listen, they're going to continue to abuse no matter what. Abusers abuse. So it's really important to know that you do not have control of your abusers, no matter what you think. You can't get them to stop. You can't get them to start. So their abuse is on them. But now that you're accidentally in the line of fire, because I often use the analogy that, abuse victims, domestic abuse victims, did not get into the relationship thinking that this was going to happen.
Right, of course.
And you stepped off a curve, you got hit by a bus, you're laying on the ground bleeding, and people are looking at you going, "What did you do?" Instead of rushing you to the hospital. And so, you're going to have to get up and you're going to have to limp your way to the hospital, because few people are going to know. But if you start to tell people, yes, there will be people that will look at you like you're crazy or lying or whatever, but you will find the people who will be by your side, and you need that. And that's free. That doesn't cost anything.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. Find that support system. Does it have to be your family? Does it have to be your friends? No, reach outside of that. But you don't have to walk this journey by yourself. And absolutely,
and the other thing that's too free is that domestic abuse centers are now pretty much in the United States. They're everywhere. If you don't have one in your community, you can get on a hotline. Now, yes, it's true. It is not always easy to get through that. But if you can get to your center, if you're lucky enough to have a center in your community, you get in that door and find out what they have. Some of it may not fit you, but some of it could. I was so fortunate because my local center offered me a lot of services. I will tell you, out of the 5 or 6 different services they offered me, I fit with only like 2. And the other ones I tried to say that I would try it, So if it was group support or if it was, a training session, I did it, kind of feeling irritated by it, but I did it anyway, because what I did get is I was lucky enough to get 2 years of free therapy, weekly therapy for free for 2 years.
I mean, that's amazing.
I know.
Tap into the resources that you have locally.
Yeah.
It's so important.
And they're different from center to center. So you do your best and you try to find it. And again, that's why your friends and family find that person who will be your late night phone call and who will come to, in my case, my sister and my stepmother came to my, flew into town to come to my hearings with me. I was lucky that I had that, but I had to tell them, and I hadn't told them,
you had to open your mouth and say something and be vulnerable and risk being judged, no one being there to support you, but you opened your mouth and said something.
Yeah. It was incredibly scary. Go ahead.
I want to touch on something real quick before I go to the next chapter. But you talk about how attorneys sometimes advise parents to stay silent about the abuse while going before the judge, which is just infuriating. Like, why are you saying to not talk about the abuse?
Yeah. One of the things that my survey revealed is that for those cases that they did not bring up the abuse, they lost custody the most.
Wow.
And those that did bring up the abuse kept at least 70% of custody time the most. Now, that doesn't mean that was in every case. It was just that the statistics, the odds are better in your favor if you tell the truth in court.
Tell them.
But it does depend on how you tell it. I see that somebody has written about the best thing I ever did was never give him rights. And you're absolutely right. That is what I have found is, and again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not I'm not a professional. I'm just a mom who did this work and did this research. I'm a journalist and I did this research. And what I found is that if you can somehow quickly convince your abuser, your lawyer, your judge that you'll share visitation, but you'll keep and maintain parental rights, which is like, what school they go to and what doctor they see, that you actually will have more of the control, which is good, because it's when you have shared. I kept in my case, and I won't talk too much about my case in Kate because of my children, who are grown, but it is their life. But I didn't realize that, and so I was willing to share decision making, but not physical custody.
Right.
The decision making is what they can abuse like crazy. you know,
Mhm.
because
And you talk about that in the book, how they really don't want to make the decisions. They just want to be able to put their input in. They don't really care about the decisions. It's just still about having power
they
and
just want to
control.
fight with you about them.
They want to fight with you, and it's not about the kids. There's
Yeah.
one person said, my attorney told me if I went for supervised visitation, it would take at least half a day in court, and I couldn't afford that. I thought that was just a crazy statement. Instead of being supportive, so it's important to find an attorney who's going to be supportive. And we talked a little bit about that before we came on, about finding an attorney who's, you know, who knows about domestic violence, who knows about the tricks of how it works, and that can really be supportive. So I want to go on to the next topic real quick. How about we talk about the fact that sometimes there's no investigation into domestic violence, period. You talked about how the NCADV found that 75% of domestic violence cases go unreported to the police in the first place.
Yeah. So domestic violence is incredibly underreported, but here's another statistic that's really crazy. Despite that, in most communities, domestic violence calls to the police department, to 911, take up about 50% of the daily calls. So so just imagine how much is going on if 70% go unreported, and yet it's still, FYI, it is other than traffic accidents, it is the most dangerous time for a police patrol officer is if they go on a domestic violence call. So this is not even close to being figured out. I mean, I heard that Biden either just passed or did an executive order on the Violence Against Women Act or something. So that may be coming back to the forefront, and that's good. You know, we need more federal legislation about that, which defines it. But we have a long way to go.
I wanted to touch on how I love how you talked about. I thought I was ignorantly believed that my most responsible move was to leave my abuser. So you figured if you picked up your children and you left, that I believed that would end the abuse and make everyone's lives, including my children's lives, better. I didn't realize that the abuse was the result of his actions and that he needed power and control more than anything else. And that need for power and control that he had doesn't go away because you got divorced.
No. And unfortunately, as you all know, the statistics of the most dangerous time for a victim is when they leave. But what happens? I use the analogy of the flies in the spider web. So your abuser is a spider and has built a web, and they want flies on that web that they can exploit whenever they need to. And so the children will always be a target. Sometimes they're forgotten and years go by and they don't care, but they can always go back to the relationships they have. And so that need, abusers abuse. They never stop abusing. They abuse the grocery store clerk. They abuse their coworkers. They abuse, but they do it in ways that that is socially acceptable or isn't criminal, many times. And so they can be ostracized. They cannot have a lot of friends. They have broken relationships like crazy. What happens with the family is that we are easy targets for dramatic abuse. And so when they've had a bad day at work, we're easy targets, to get that high of abuse, which is what they're looking to do. Mm-hmm. And it is true that when you leave and you take the children with you, sometimes they never make the connection that they can exploit family court. Sometimes they think that they're afraid of family court because they think they're going to get arrested for the domestic violence.
Yeah.
Sometimes they figure out that they can use it, and that is the very unfortunate case.
It's so, some of these comments are really interesting. Someone said that their judge told them to say, and I read this in your book too, it's so funny. They said, well, just call him a bully. Don't talk about abuse. And so they want you to, and it's so funny that you write, and it's like, you want me to minimize the fact that I accepted the fact that it's abusive and minimize it and call them a bully. But I love what someone just said in the comments, kind of go by so fast, but they said, I did it and you can do it too. No one helped me. It was hard. It was extremely hard. It was the most terrifying thing they ever did, but they did it anyway. And you said that in your book. You said, leaving was indeed a responsible and important choice to protect myself and my children. Yes, I still had post abuse after leaving, but it was still the most responsible choice that I made for myself and my children.
Yeah, I've heard of cases where even therapists, even domestic abuse shelters will make a recommendation in an individual case, because of all the variables, to stay a little bit in there and create a safety plan about when you're going to go. In other words, delay it because, like it was, people with very young children, sometimes that's just the best option, but none of that really is right. What is right is getting out. And I was lucky that my therapist said, by removing my children, even if they have to go to their father's house, they at least have your place as a place of safety.
Safety.
And that alone can help them mitigate the damage that abuse does. And so
somebody asked, National Coaching Professionals asked, are you able to, Julie, are you able to touch on penalizing survivors with failure to protect? And I'll touch on that after you, because I used to work with the Department of Children and Families and realized that failure to protect is a thing. When a woman most of the time is in an abusive relationship, they will remove the children and can call it failure to protect. So did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, that's another part of this system that is incredibly broken. If you don't leave, you can lose your children. Like, say a neighbor calls or a teacher calls, or a child tells a teacher that my mom got beat up. Those are cases that happen. Now, the truth is, I have not seen that in my work in a lot of cases. Those are the rare cases, but it can happen. And that is how common. It's so important that you not go it alone, meaning that you build a support system. You start telling the truth about it to your friends, your family, the school teachers, every adult who is in your life with your children. You will lose some of those people. Some of those people will judge you harshly. Some of those people go, oh, I don't want to get in that messy, dirty laundry. Forget about them, write them off. But you will find people who will help. And the more that you do this, the less vulnerable you are to those types of accusations.
And that's a good point, telling people, because I think that when the reports are made, they can say, well, I told my kid's teacher, I told the daycare worker, I worked in a lot. I saw a lot of these cases here in the state. And the truth of the matter is, to be honest with you, oftentimes the victim survivor wanted to go back to the abuser. So they're asking us to return the children back to the parent, but that means that the children are being returned back into the abusive home. So it's really tricky when the Department of Children and Families, or whatever it's called in your state, is involved. So yes, failure to protect is a thing, but once someone knows about it, you get yourself together with an advocate. I personally fought to help survivors get their children back, because I knew that they were ready to not go back to the relationship. DCF is going to return and take the children if you go back to the abuser. So the goal was to make sure that you free yourself, tell somebody about the abuse so they can vouch for what you're going through. Because the thing is, we stay silent because we think we're protecting them and ourselves. But what happens is it ferments in the silence. It just continues to grow.
That's right. And, abusers are like schoolyard bullies. In other words, they are doing what they think is easy. They are chicken. They're not courageous. And so the more that the light is shined on them, the harder it is for them in their own brain to see this as a tool to soothe their inner beast. And so it is counterintuitive to tell, because for all the reasons that we know, I went for 15 years and didn't tell. Just so you know, I went for 15 years, did not tell a soul. And so I understand it. It is common. It is what I've seen, but it is something that you really have to try to break. You really do.
I agree.
And then
I saw someone had a question. If you can, it went too fast. If you want to ask the question again, go ahead, because it went too fast. Sorry, Julie. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. I think that again, I just want to reiterate that this is incredibly difficult emotionally. And it is gaslighting. It is financially hard. There is no right answer. But most importantly, it is incredibly unjust.
It's
and
unfair. It's
and
unfair.
it is very much so.
Yeah. And that's why I like how you titled the book, Dear Family Court Judge, because you need to know what it really feels like to be a victim and understand what they're going through.
Right.
You know, it's so important because maybe it will change the dynamic of the decisions that they make when it comes to child custody, when it comes to decisions about making them go to barrier intervention or something.
And it's important to remember the perspective of family court judges. Why are they doing this? It seems so common sense, obvious. And the thing is that day after day, like, one of the things I did is I went into family court dockets and I started looking at what was on the docket. And what was basically on the docket in family court, other than, because when there's a non-contested divorce, they don't hit the docket. They're just signed off and the lawyers, in many states. But what's on the docket for 30 minutes is child support. Collecting child support, trying to get a deadbeat dad or a deadbeat mom to pay child support. It's almost always in this day and age, it's going to be the father. Mostly, again, it's not gender-based, but it is what it is. And the thing is that, so that judge is sitting there hour after hour after hour. There are 15, 30-minute cases where he says, pay the child support, pay the child support, pay the child support. And they hear sometimes, I don't have a job, or I don't this, or I don't that, whatever, pay the child support, pay the child. And then boom, once or twice a week, there's a father asking for custody. Says, oh, I'll pay child support. Oh, I just want to see my kid. And they go, oh, well, finally, a father wants to see their kid. So that's where they're coming from. And they don't believe that anybody, any abuser would be there doing that. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And you interviewed a judge too in your book where you talk a little bit about that. And it's so interesting you say that. I remember my ex-husband, he didn't want to pay child support. He fought me for custody. I mean, tooth and nail, these odd days in the middle of the week and an extra every other weekend, something. And I'm like, are you serious? And can I tell you, not once in over 10 years has he ever followed the court custody plan. It wasn't about the children. It was about power and control over me.
Right.
And of course, paying less child support, because depending on the amount of custody, depends on how much child support.
That's usually what brings an abuser to court if they haven't gone, is that there is the child support, is that either somebody has asked for child support, or somebody, the state or the victim. And that's what usually triggers it. But it's not usual. I mean, the thing is that the important thing as a victim to know, you can do A and B can happen. You could do B and A can happen. You cannot control this abuser. They're going to do whatever they figure out in any given day, makes them happy or makes them feel, dominating, like they're dominating. And so, or they're going to go for feeling pity, like they don't care if people feel pity on them. So they're dealing with their own day-to-day emotions in a way that we can only barely understand.
Yeah.
And so the truth is you're in a hurricane. I've used that analogy before. You're in a hurricane. There are waves coming in all different directions that make no sense. And you're just trying to keep your children and you on that life raft. Yeah. And that is what's happening. And it's maddening because we feel like we can control this a little bit. And the truth is we really can't.
Yes, we can. Yeah. I'm going to put the book up on, someone asked for the book. I'm going to put it up here. And you can get it on Amazon. But I want to go on to financial abuse using family court. So family court is becoming the preferred arena for abusers to create fear and instability in their victims' lives by simply filing multiple family court actions. And I love this book because you just talk about facts. Like, seriously, this is what they do. We hear this as advocates all the time. Each time an abuser files a family court, the victim has to go back. Their legal fees, court fees, lost wages, anxiety, fear for their children, fear for themselves. And it's just a way to keep the power and control going.
Yeah. So think about this. The American Constitution says that you can file a civil suit against anybody, anytime, for any reason. You may not win it, but you can file it. Everybody has access. So as long as you have minor children together, they could file a family court case against you every day for that entire time until they're no longer minors. They have a constitutional right to do it.
Unreal.
So
that's abuse, okay? Honestly, especially coming from an abuser, it's just a continuous form of abuse. That's what that is.
Yeah. Now, the truth is that as soon as your minor child turns 17 and a half, depends on the community and the state and the country, but most family court judges will no longer hear these things because they look then at the person who's filing and says, what are you doing? This is almost an adult, get out of my courtroom. But as soon as your minor child turns 18, family court is done. They can it's no longer the jurisdiction that they can sue you on. And they usually walk from that because now if they file a suit against you for any reason, they got to have some kind of cause. Otherwise it'll be dismissed. Okay. And it will be seen as abuse. But family court is different. As long as you have children together, they can use the court system to handle every single parenting issue or non-parenting. They can use it over and over and over. Constitutionally
so draining. It's just so draining and frustrating and expensive. People are talking about in the comments how much they've spent just on that alone. And it's really, really frustrating for victims to have to go through. It really, and it's unfair. And I think one of the biggest things is educating the legal system as to what domestic violence really looks like. Because if someone's coming in there to you and they're a survivor, the way that you handle the entire case should be different, period.
That's right.
And I know that you talk about how, well, the judge, when you talk to the judge, he said, well, this courtroom is not to deal with relationship issues. That's not what this is. And again, this is not a relationship issue. Domestic violence is a crime. It's not a relationship issue. See, oftentimes domestic violence is looked at as a crime after the person has been deceased or after a serious implication has happened or a crime has happened against the victim. Someone said, actually, I'm going to go back to this quote right here because they said emotional abuse is virtually impossible to substantiate in court.
That's right. Now, there are countries, and I think even states now, but I know in England, I believe it's in England, although I'm not 100% sure on that, but there are countries where emotional abuse is a crime. It's coercion is what it's called. And so, it's very difficult in the United States. There's very little, we're talking about the areas that are underfunded like crazy. And so there's just other battles that police want to fight, blah, blah, blah.
And it should be. I mean, they don't even have to put a finger on you to completely, control your life and destroy you.
And it really is a crime. Coercion is a crime. Yes. But it's, it used to be years ago, even like 2 decades ago, rape within a marriage was not a crime. So just think about that. And so now that's changed. And so we advocates, again, my children are grown. So that's why I advocate. I never advise anybody who's in this with minor children to become advocates or at least public advocates, because your children, you need to focus on getting you and yourself through this. It's so exhausting.
Especially. And I want to piggyback on that because I know often people always want to know, how do I do this? How do I become an advocate? How do I help others? I believe it's so important to get to a place where you're not dealing with the court system. You're not dealing with the abuser so much anymore because it's hard. I've seen so many people say their abuser continues to take them to court. Anything they post on social media, it's very, very important. And we try to let people know even too, this is a public page. So it's very important to protect yourself. And if you're still in court with your abuser and you're making posts and all this kind of stuff, it's just not a good idea.
Yeah. So, and
protect yourself.
The thing about advocacy is that the abuser is going to use everything they can get their hands on.
Any and everything.
Yes. And you're trying to deal with crazy, so that's what it comes down to. And you can't. So, again, I really focus on, it's time to advocate. We have to keep advocating. We have to change this. That's not something to accept. It is what it is now, but we have to change this. So when you get out of it, when your children are out of family court control,
Yeah.
by all means advocate, write books, do studies, participate, create surveys, talk to your local community. One thing you can do, and I've done this, and it's difficult, but one thing you can do is talk to your local police department. I have spoken to deputies, police officers. I've gone in and spoken to them. It's very hard. That some people you're speaking to are in fact abusers, but they need to, any place you can go to help. The police officers or the police departments will bring you in. Judges don't tend to. It's very hard to get a judge to listen to you as an advocate because they, not for nothing, they have a lot of education and they think they've got it figured out.
I was going to address somebody's comment over here when they asked a question about being honest and open while protecting their children. And I mean, for myself, my children are, there's 12 and 13. They were 2 and 3 when I left. And obviously I've been an advocate, for 5 years, but I was in the position for myself where I was ready to share my story. I felt safe enough. And I'm remarried now and stuff like that. And I've been doing this for 6 years at this point. And so I'm at the position where my children were still underage, but I'm able to do it. And while I share my story, my children have been, they go to events with me. They've heard this story a million times, you know? And so
mine.
yeah. And it really, someone just said it, they're like, everyone's story is different. And you just have to really be sure that advocating, especially out loud verbally, is something that you're safe enough to do. And it won't be something that, there's repercussions for. So I know we have a few more minutes, but I wanted to touch on your chapter 8, where you talk about there's no trauma treatment. 90% of children in homes where experience that domestic violence, they experience it as well. And trauma in childhood left untreated creates a host of lifelong illnesses and consequences that cost society billions of dollars. That's what the CDC said. And it's interesting that it's so important. The faster a child can get removed from an abusive situation and their feelings are validated, the less long-term emotional damage is created. So get the children out of the abusive situation and get them treatment, get them help.
Yeah, it's critical. It's critical. This is, this is really deep, hard stuff. And we are not equipped as human beings to deal with this on our own. We're not trained as human beings to deal with this. And it is psychologically incredibly damaging. So that is how come as an advocate, I'm saying, I know how hard it is to find help. Don't give up, keep trying.
Don't give up.
I went through a lot of therapists, I gotta say, and it was maddening, but don't give up because you need professional help. Your children need professional help. Yes. Your abuser needs professional help, but they're not going to get it, or they're not going to learn from it. The judges, the attorneys, they all need professional help. But they need real trained help. And that's the other thing about it, is that there's not a lot of training about domestic violence dynamics in this particular area in med school or in your psychological degree. I have found that social workers are the best, because they're trained in environmental issues, and this is an environmental issue. In other words, you are not the cause. You've been put in an environment that's causing this. Right.
It's not your fault. There's nothing that you could have done differently. Nothing that hey, where's that? Hey, Heather, I love that you said you're a warrior, girl. You made me laugh over here. She's like, I've been out for 20 years and I'm a warrior. I love it.
Yeah, good.
So someone asked the questions, how can you tell if your child isn't showing signs of being impacted by abuse? And I believe her child was a little bit young, maybe 5. I just remember my ex-husband had pushed me through the kitchen wall, and in the wall, there was left like a huge hole in the wall. And I remember my daughter's 3 at the time, but she refused to walk through the kitchen. And even after he fixed the hole, let me tell you, if I called and said, Julie, oh my gosh, he pushed me through. So there's a hole in the wall. He had fixed the hole. So I would look like,
of
course. But my daughter still would not walk through the kitchen. She always walked around. And so at 3 years old. And so it's interesting. They may not be able to verbalize what's going on, but they sense it and they see it. So if you're getting help in therapy, let them get help, especially whatever age they're at. If they're young, there's play therapy options. So it's really important. If you feel as though you need the help, I would definitely look at getting them the help as well, so that there's no long-term effects. Especially
they may need that help in adulthood. And when they can get some therapy as children, it shows them that it's an option when they get to adulthood, when they really can process what's happened to them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You talk about, I wanted to touch on one more thing. You talked about how the no satisfaction. Oftentimes, and I tell this, Julie, I tell this to victim survivors all the time. I just want justice. He deserves to pay for what he did. She deserves to pay. And I agree. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely 110% agree. If you have the opportunity to file charges, if you have the opportunity to get custody, do whatever. But I promise you, if you are out and safe and you are ready at the point and able to move on, turning back to try to say you deserve to, it's like you're holding your life back in a way instead of moving forward and being free. Wanting justice for what happened to you. Do you deserve it? Absolutely. If you're able to get it, go get it. But don't hold up the momentum that your life can take by turning around to say, you deserve to pay for what you did for me.
I think I'd like to just take a moment and say that I had all those feelings too. And I had setbacks galore. I made I can't even begin to tell how many different ways. Like we had a parenting coordinator who, somebody in the comments said, "Hi, Jack." Yeah, my parenting coordinator completely fell for my abuser. And even though, my abuser stipulated to the abuse, went on record and said, yep, it all happened. My parenting coordinator said, well, you need to go deal with that on your own, Julie, with your own therapist. In here, we're just going to talk about co-parenting, and I'm like,
crazy.
Are you nuts? Like,
crazy.
These are liars. These aren't, how can you parent a liar? But the thing is what I'm trying to say is that it is a journey and a process. I can tell you, like the warrior who's been out 20 years, I've been out a long time, and it is true, Lisa, the best revenge is a better life that you can lead. And the best revenge, the justice, is that if you heal from this and your children, and you can help your children heal, that's your justice, that's your satisfaction. And that does come, not right away. Not right away,
but it comes, and it's the best feeling ever. And if you just know, see, this is the thing. I love to tell the story. You guys have probably heard it a million times or whatever. But I was watching a YouTube video the night that I decided to leave, and I saw a woman who was in an abusive relationship. She got out, and she had gotten remarried and was happy. And that was the moment I said, well, that's my goal. That is what I want. I had never thought that there was life outside of what I was living, and it freed me. And that's the night that I left with my children. And so if you're watching this and you're thinking, I wonder if, or this is my life forever, it doesn't have to be. There's life on the other side of it. But I wanted to just say that real quick, but I wanted to go back. You talked about co-parenting. It's not just co-parenting when you're dealing with domestic violence. It's co-parenting with an abuser. Like it's like a whole sign. That should totally be a sign in an office somewhere. Yeah. And it's not just co-parenting. We're not coming to you just for a divorce. We're coming to you for a divorce with an abuser. It's a totally different dynamic, because we may be separating or not together anymore. But the fact of the matter is my children still have to deal with this person, and this person is going to continue to abuse, as my abuser has continued to go on and abuse. And our only goal as parents, mothers, fathers, is to protect our children from the abuse.
Yeah, so, there's many cases that are public out there. Scott Powell is one who, was famous years ago. He was suspected of killing his wife. They had 2 young children. The state let him visit with the 2 young children, even though he was, I don't know if he was convicted or he was indicted or something. And he pushed the guardian ad litem out the front door, brought the 2 kids in, locked the door, and blew up the house and killed them all. Oh. And so, these are not, this is crazy, and everybody is right to feel anxious and scared and it's unfair and it's corrupt. Everybody is right to feel that that is accurate. And unfortunately, if you go into court and you say that, they will say you're crazy and you're lying and you're wrong, and they will punish you.
Yeah. Yeah. Make sure that you document the abuse. Remember, we have Victim's Voice and Document the Abuse. If you need information from them, inbox us. Document the abuse. So when you're going to court, you do have the evidence. We're not saying that the evidence is going to cause a big difference, but you still have the evidence. And that's really important. And before we let Julie go, if anybody has any last minute questions, try to get it in really quickly. But I want to just piggyback off of something you said. And you said revenge is living your best life. And I'm a living witness to that. I am just living the complete opposite life of what I did when I was in my abusive marriage. And he had me believe that nothing like this, nothing outside of him could have ever existed. And I'm here to tell you that it's an absolute lie. There's this like whole life. You see the smiles that Julie and I have. Like we didn't just wake up one day. We went through the hell. We went through the journey. We went through the pain. And then you're looking at people on the other side of this. And so it's really, really important that you take that journey. I remember my abuser saying, oh, like, years after we got divorced, well, you just think you're so smart with all your degrees. I was like, no, you think I'm so smart, but thank you for the compliment. I just went and did everything you said that I could never do. And so I encourage you to go do and be everything you've ever desired to be. And don't jokes on them. I love that. I love that.
Because once you're out, become a guardian ad litem. Go get involved in the local court system. Go volunteer at your local center. And because the more people who've been through it, because remember, this is a relatively new phenomenon. It's just the last couple of decades that this has happened. So there's not a lot of people who have experienced what we've experienced. So, but I do want to give you hope. Lisa is a great example, but there is an end to this, that your children will always have scars, that you will always have to deal with that. But you can heal from this. And you can have a better life, and this will come to an end. Listen, I was financially destroyed, and you know what? I learned not to love money. I don't care, so.
Yep. I remember I couldn't afford my kids. We used to eat the $5 Little Caesars pizza, and I would take them to the beach, and they would think they were in Hawaii. To them, they didn't know mom didn't have any money. Mom was struggling to pay the bills, but we were free. We weren't living in abuse anymore. And for me, that was it. I didn't care. They didn't know the difference. Mac and cheese for like 3 days. Who cares? We're free. We're safe. We go to sleep at night. It was worth everything, that we went through. So yes, Emily, this is recorded. The live will stay on the page. It'll be in our video section. Can your abuser go after you for legally saying that you're a survivor? Can your abuser go after you for legally saying that you're a survivor? I want to speak out. Again, I'll reiterate this, and Julie, you can jump in. If you are in the midst of a court custody battle or anything similar, I would encourage you to be very careful about how you go about sharing that information.
One thing to know is that you can always talk to an attorney about that kind of thing. The attorney in your custody case is always going to advise you to keep your mouth shut. Publicly, I don't think they'll ever tell you not to tell people, but it's all in how you say it. First of all, don't ever use your abuser's name.
No.
Start there. Second of all, you can say things like, to your children's teachers, listen, I want you to know that my child comes from an abusive household or an abusive family. And so if you ever say anything, please know that he's the survivor of abuse, or I am a survivor of abuse. Those are facts. And facts don't, nobody can tell you that you're doing something wrong for stating facts. Mm-hmm. As long as you don't put conclusions to them, or as long as you don't say, well, he should be treated this way because he's an abuser. Mm-hmm. Don't do that in a court.
I agree. And don't name drop. It's not necessary, especially on social media. I've never named my ex-husband. If you knew who he was when I was married to him, great. But who cares? It's still my story and it's mine. And I always say, and this is just me though, I've just become fearless, and I feel safe, so the moment I lie, stop me. But until then, I'm going to scream from the rooftops to help as many survivors as we can. And I love it, Sharia, free. Absolutely. That's our goal, to be free, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. So Julie, Yay. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much. I know that everyone got so much out of it. And so we definitely are going to go through the comments and just randomly pick a few people to send some books out to. So you'll receive an inbox from us. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you guys next time. Thanks, Julie.
Take care, guys.
Bye, guys. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Don't go anywhere, Julie. Hang out with me. All right. See you guys. Uh-oh. I can't end it. What's going on? Here we go. You guys are still with me because... Okay, here we go.